Monday, Fridays for like,
Doctor.
yeah, like personal projects
Right.
and like things like non-OU related. But yeah, that doesn't always happen. I try.
Yeah. Yeah, Thursday's my day, so today I have a doctor's appointment. I did have a lesson for someone who didn't show up. So, that's all right. We got our days confused. I was like, it happens to all of us.
Tone for my
So,
one-line sentence.
and, yeah, it's nice. Went, played with the dogs and
Sure, I mean,
watched 30 minutes of a show and
Hey,
and
did
was
laundry.
she did too.
I know.
yeah, I did like half laundry and then realized that I closed the washer for like a week.
I've done that. It's
So
so
bad.
bad.
I know. It's like,
And there's like not enough vinegar in the world. This stuff is just
So I got like
gone.
triple washed.
It's really, really bad. I know, that is, I have a set of wash racks that do that. They ended up going to the cleaning people, like who, if they're cleaning here. 2 weeks.
Reached the
Yes,
saturation
yes,
point.
exactly.
So how much more are you doing with Patty?
I mean, Harris
Are you
coming in
guys
so
done?
late, feels like, why don't we all
We're done
start
recording
this at that
the
time?
album, but
Seriously.
if, we'll find out November 8th, I think, if it gets nominated for a Grammy, and then if it does, then it's, I don't even know.
Yeah.
I just do what I'm told.
Nice. That's so cool.
But I'm sure we'll, like,
Feels, yeah.
Was it choir?
And it makes, I mean,
Yeah.
rules
So
make
then
that
did you
game
go
interesting.
around to the
So
different, does she have choirs
If you
in
can
the
raise money
studio,
for 10
or-
years, maybe next
so,
year for a campaign, that's not as
do you
interesting.
know who Michelle Jensen is?
If you have a
I know the
finite
name.
amount of
So she's
time
like
to develop a
based in
platform,
California.
build it,
So it's like
yeah.
her like semi-professional choir that she formed a couple years ago.
Okay,
So it's kind of like, she teaches at
Play
Azusa
clock
Pacific.
okay,
And they always, like, they graduate and there's like nothing
right.
to keep, and then,
Right.
you do the audition, so they form this ensemble, this
Oh,
choir,
cool.
that they meet once like every Monday evening
Uh-huh.
or something like that. And it's like voluntary, but is also audition.
Right,
So they sang everything.
And
wow.
And then all of the orchestral
Length at
parts.
which
Did you
she
guys
takes
hired them?
before
Is that, you knew
Um,
them?
Yeah, so one of the
Okay.
producers knew them.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the orchestral parts were recorded here in Oklahoma.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Yeah.
She was my choir teacher.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How fun is that?
You know, and you don't realize how young she, like I had no
I know.
idea how young she was when I was, 'cause
Yeah.
this was
When
like
is SMT, is it right?
9th and 10th grade.
I mean, and she just looks great now.
She does,
Like,
she
I'm like,
does.
how old are you?
Yeah,
Grandkids? Wait,
It's not
what?
combined.
yeah. And it's a girl and daughter, and
Mhm.
yeah, so I'm really happy for her. She's very driven.
Yes, yes,
Go back to this.
yeah. I don't, we didn't like, we didn't choose like the choir part, so I'm not sure like,
How that,
yeah, it was just like, you're gonna, help produce.
And I'm
we're
now
gonna
of the
fix
opinion
this
that
thing,
everything should always
But
be
like,
rotated.
everybody works so well together, like I can see.
yeah.
And she has so much music written.
Have the,
She's
have
always
the
writing.
Well,
confidence.
she's
Dallas,
such
have
a
the
genius, like anyway, like,
Denver, and just trio.
But yeah, a lot of people have been getting really good feedback about
Weather's
the album,
reasonable at
so.
November and
Nice.
most
People
places.
are like,
It's
that's somebody
cheaper to
who
get
lives in
to.
Oklahoma?
Yeah.
Like, are you sure? I was like, yes, I know where she lives.
I know. When I first moved here, we were
More
just
than
talking
needs to be.
about everything, and like how hard it was for her,
Where are you?
fortunately, to like get any kind of conducting things and stuff here, because it's just male dominated. And then she just, she'd been writing and she arranging for sure, she'd been arranging for all the things. So that just kind of like came about naturally. She was the best pianist of any of the teachers.
Oh, yeah, I can see that, yeah.
No, fantastic, yeah,
That's
just
cool.
great.
That's exciting.
So, yeah, my brother was with her. So, we go way back. So,
That's so fun.
yeah.
Hello.
Where I was when I,
There'll be more of you.
that's what I was trying to do.
We'll just talk to each other.
Yes, exactly. I didn't write anything down.
Yeah.
I was on a string
'Cause-
task force and it was three Jonathans.
Ideas will come.
I guess, I hope everyone starts
said I
before
was on
me.
a
There we go.
task
They seem
force for
responsible.
strings.
That's
Like
exactly what I was
books and, like,
Exactly.
notes.
John Rodney too.
Yeah.
I was like, so Jonathan, and they, I was like, they all love it.
Erica, hi.
Yeah, you're not gonna be sleeping tonight?
need to
we're
change.
anchoring this thing, either end.
Yes, that's right.
I think that's what it is.
You have to go first, though.
No. That's your seat.
Remember, you know I'm not the most prepared, let's be honest.
Stage right to stage left.
We'll make Jonathan go first.
It's a PowerPoint.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know
Jonathan.
Jonathan has
Yeah.
PowerPoint.
We saved him a seat.
That's right, and we're in the center. So you go first.
We should just bring chairs up here for you
I know,
all. There's
yeah.
not enough
Maybe
people,
I'll sit in
just
the front row.
Seniority.
just come up here and sit with us.
We're all associates, so.
So what's happening now?
So we're what?
Yes. So if something else happens, like
Jonathan Shaw.
because was there this road?
There's Jonathan, James.
Hey Jeff, how are you? Hi Jonathan, how are you? Hi. How you doing? I loved it.
She's working on the rights right now with the Think big.
Land all
Like, how cool is that?
say,
It's way bigger than
If
I
mine is not what you're looking for, you can say anything you want.
The three cuts of perfect shape for us.
It was like,
She's in.
Hello.
She's in Cambridge. That would be there.
Yeah.
But that we could debut it.
I know I'm
That would be so
down
cool.
the path of perdition,
Right.
and there's
Yes,
nothing more
yes.
embarrassing.
It's way far away, but it's still actually happening. So.
Christine, how you doing?
Oh, hello.
Hello, ma'am.
How are you?
So I forgot to tell you, I already have him a film and music office. He's featuring me in November
Oh,
for
sweet.
their like
So I would clearly astonished.
music career, I think.
Okay.
I just don't know what I can and cannot say about the minor.
Here's it, anything you want.
Anything I want? All
Yeah.
right.
Very nice.
I mean, that's real.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, good thing.
yeah, I meant more like promoting it. Yes, no.
Yeah.
Were you married?
Because one of the questions was like, what are your, what are your future goals and how do you see them like manifesting or something like that? And I was like, oh, I'd love to talk about the minor. I just didn't know. I was like, I should probably get permission first.
Yeah, right, right.
The Oklahoma,
Oh, that was
Oklahoma, the state of
about
Oklahoma
borrowing
has a
wood
film
together.
music
Yeah,
office.
very
Oh,
smart.
right.
Yeah.
That was every, so yeah, everybody will cruise up.
It's very interesting places.
and then
Things go there.
the ladies were
Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
very pretty,
Very nice.
very.
Such a sweet kid. I just love that that was going on.
We're tied right now.
We're tied. You
So
guys
we've known
better
about
call some people.
Yeah, exactly.
She plays it.
Well, we're probably going to say the most profound things about music and the career that have ever been said.
Ever, ever.
Yeah, nothing, nothing
I know I'm
new.
prepared to do that.
Yeah.
Are you? Yeah. Look at everything.
On
that's
occasion,
written
I
down.
take care of fun.
It's okay.
In the ether. Yeah, that's an empty space.
Nice guy.
Let it
Very.
Well, look, it takes a village to approve these things.
That's right. Entire violence that
He sounds like he couldn't talk.
I understand. I was doing the SWAT thing on my computer in my office.
Little shit up in a little marriage that
Yeah,
took place,
yeah.
which is very nice.
Oh, yeah.
Students, so best of luck.
I'm glad he approved.
How are you? I do.
Good.
Hey, by the way, Lucy ain't somebody you invited?
No, that was, I know Lucy, but that was.
Drink coffees.
I gotta talk to her because
I was wondering if, you know.
Well, hello,
I
everybody.
had to stop by noon.
I'm Jeff Swinkin. I'm coordinating the Norton series this year. It's nice to see you here. Hope you're having a good semester so far, at the halfway point, right? We got a really varied season this year with a variety of formats, including a panel discussion and actually another one down the road. Just want to announce briefly the next event on the series will be Dr. Stephen Lett, who is a music theory lecturer. Steve is a really passionate and interesting thinker in all ways, and his work is in part in music therapy, which is something we don't hear a lot of here at OU. And so I encourage you to come to his talk, which is entitled "How to DJ a Psychedelic Trip: Approaches to Music in Clinical Psychedelic Therapy." Really fascinating sounding title, which is going to be November 14 here in Pittman, 6 p.m. So, today I had the idea to convene a panel on curricular, just ideas, ideals, reform. Something that's impressed me as a faculty member here the past decade has been how OU seems always to be trying to rethink, to evolve, to improve, always trying to do the best for our students, and especially this year in an accreditation year. So I thought it would be timely to ask 6 professors and administrators from across the school, representing different areas of the school, to just share their thoughts. There wasn't any particular prompt. There's no, this is not necessarily a unified presentation, but more just a hodgepodge of different ideas. I should emphasize that today is not about creating policy. Nothing is actionable here. This is really just a forum in which to dream our curricular dreams aloud. And who knows, maybe some of that will seep into how and what we teach here. And we also want to hear from you. So each panelist is going to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll open it up town hall style, okay? I'm going to introduce the panelists. First, I really want to thank them for being so generous with their time during what I know is a very busy part of the semester. I want to introduce all of them at once. Please hold your applause until the end, if you don't mind. I'm going to introduce them alphabetically. Dr. Charlene Dell is Associate Professor of Music Education, specializing in string education and teacher development. Her current research areas are string intonation and the influence of musical instruction in urban and rural communities. She also conducts the Oklahoma Youth Philharmonic, a full orchestra in OKC. Lorraine Ernst is Assistant Professor of Voice. She has performed nationally and internationally for over 25 years in the US and Europe, including the Metropolitan Opera. She is a devoted mentor and advocate for students who are passionate about artistic expression through voice. She has taught for 20 years, specializing in applied music and voice, diction, vocal lit, and performance classes within many diverse learning environments. Dr. Christina Chacona is lecturer of Native American World and American Popular Musics. She is the co-founder of Onyx Lane. Am I pronouncing that right? Oh, okay. Got lucky. Where she works as music producer, session conductor, artistic director, and score supervisor. When she's not in the studio, Dr. Chacona is a lecturer on commercial and American music for the OU School of Music and affiliate faculty for the OU Arts Management and Entrepreneurship Graduate Program. Dr. Jake Johnson is Assistant Professor of Musicology. He's a writer, pianist, and vocal coach. He is the author of multiple books, including the forthcoming Unstaged Grief, Musicals and Mourning in Mid-Century America, and a biography of the 1940 song When You Wish Upon a Star. Dr. Johnson is also editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American Musicological Society, the flagship journal of the American Musicological Society. Dr. Jonathan Nickel needs no introduction,
Thanks, Jeff.
but I'm going to do it anyway.
I'm infamous.
He is professor of saxophone, and in case you did not know, the director of our School of Music here at the University of Oklahoma. He is an active performing saxophonist who champions new music and has presented concerts throughout the world. Jonathan is a founding member of the H2 Quartet. which has been the recipient of the prestigious gold medal at the 2007 Fish-Off National Chamber Music Competition. And finally, Dr. Jonathan Shames is professor of conducting and artistic director of the OU Opera Theater. He is a pianist, conductor, and teacher. He writes, quote, "After too many years of engagement in people understanding and misunderstanding each other, his dawning suspicion is that understanding is maybe not where it's at in the first place." Let's welcome our panelists and hear what they have to say. Why don't we kick it off with Professor Jake Johnson.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And thank you all for being here and being alongside me here. Maybe the privilege of going first is I can hit the easy things first. Leave Jonathan Nickel to have the hard stuff at the end.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Give us some easy ones.
I'll give a couple of them down there. So what does a holistic integrated undergraduate curriculum look like? That's the question that we're animating around today. So I have a few observations, really, and things that occupy my mind and thinking. And if you've ever been in my classes, you may have heard some of this before. But I'll start by saying that any kind of curriculum is a set of values and also a complex machine that enacts those values. And so what's interesting about thinking about curriculum in terms of like a degree sheet is that it is both a process and a product that we're having to reconcile. And the way I like to think about the world is that if you invite every concept to be a question, you all of a sudden get a different kind of presentation. And so if you're looking through a degree sheet and thinking with a question mark after everything, it actually creates a different scenario and different relationship from requirement to opportunity or invitation. Class piano, question mark, musicology, question mark, conducting, question mark. And the other thing that's an observation is that as a set of values, the people who are collected around that both are molded to those values and are also able to enact different ways of expanding those values. So the faculty, the students, the staff, the future employers of graduates from, say, University of Oklahoma School of Music are all circling and orbiting these sets of values, whether they're aware of them or not. And so I think it's important to kind of start articulating what we think those values might be in, let's say, a present curriculum, but also what those values might be in a future one that's not yet. So I have kind of three tenets that I wanted to speak to briefly. They're kind of like object lessons. I don't have any slides here, so you just have to imagine. I think they're vivid. They're like vivid objects, so you can imagine them. The first one's a milkshake. And so, just imagine a milkshake in your head. And these three activities, I think, will in some ways circle the problem of curriculum as a set of values. There are probably no answers to this, but there's a lot of questions embedded within them. So the story I'm borrowing here about a milkshake comes from Clayton Christensen, who was a marketing guru at Harvard Business College. And he talked about a time when McDonald's had unveiled a new line of milkshakes but weren't selling them the way they had intended. And you can understand that a place like McDonald's would do a tremendous amount of market research before they do anything. And so this was surprising to them. They weren't selling. And so they hired another firm to come in, and the person who was in charge of this discovery essentially sat in a single McDonald's all day and took note of every time someone ordered a milkshake. And then he followed them around and asked them why they ordered a milkshake, which was a great, ethnography on the ground. And they were surprised to find that most milkshakes were sold in the morning, and that's not at all what McDonald's was planning. And so he asked people a really interesting question: what job are you hiring this milkshake to do for you? That's the question. What job are you hiring this milkshake to do for you? And their answer was something to do with, well, I need to drive to work. I need one hand free, and this is the easy thing to do. I need to feel full until my next break. It's really calorically dense. I don't want to spill stuff all over me because I'm wearing clothes for the rest of the day. And so the companion question was, why were you hiring this milkshake instead of other competitor foods, other breakfast items that were there? So why this and not that? And what was so interesting about that scenario to me is that you move beyond intention into discoverability. So McDonald's intended its milkshakes probably sold to teenagers after school or in the middle of the night, not adults going to work in an office job. And so they had a different relationship to the product they were trying to sell. They marketed it differently. They put things like nuts and bits of fruit in it because people also like the game of and maybe you do too, right? The game of bringing up different like objects in your milkshake. Is anyone like that? Like this is like an insider tip for Brahms. You get the you get the German chocolate shake and not the chocolate shake because you get lots of coconut and nuts in it. It's just an insider tip for those who are interested in that because it's more fun. And so anyway, the idea of what job are you hiring something to do, I think is translatable to thinking about curriculum, and that would be somebody who's a student, who's having to take a class, right, who has no control so much over what they're taking. Okay, I'm in this scenario, what job am I gonna hire this class to do for me? What do I want it to do? I'm in charge here. What am I gonna hire it to do? This could be also on the faculty or the staff side of things. I have this opportunity to teach for this many weeks, this many hours. What job am I hiring this class to do for me? And I think it's a nice way of turning it around from being an inherited problem to one that you actually can own. So the second object lesson is a spiral, and I was trying to think really hard, okay, what does a spiral look like? And so my image here is a tornado. If you imagine a tornado that has a skeleton, what does the skeleton of a tornado look like? Well, it looks like this kind of spiral. I thought that was regionally appropriate reference. So this is a model that I've learned from my medical school friends who've gone through DO training, and that training is implicitly holistic as opposed to MD training. And so as opposed to, as I understand it, going through a typical health regime or learning about the body is to take 6 weeks learning about the circulatory system and then 6 weeks learning about the next system and so forth. And in the DO program, they spiral through instead, so everything's integrated because, in fact, the body's integrated. So no matter how much you want to study how something is independent, it doesn't work that way. So you spiral through concepts, through topics, and sometimes you pass through the heart, and then in reference to the kidneys. And then the next time you pass through the heart, you know something about how it works with the kidneys, then you add to that by thinking about how it works with, I don't know, your brain or something else. This is the limits of my understanding about medical problems. But what I like about that model, that object lesson, this kind of spiraling thing, is that it distributes content in interesting ways. So instead of having this kind of sequestered space where, okay, on this block of this town is where everyone sells flowers, and on that block is where everyone sells machinery, and on this block, instead of having that model, you have one that is always passed around. And so in my own world of musicology or music history, what that might mean to me is that it's not solely my job or my colleagues' job who teach classes called that to teach people content related to music history, that in fact that's happening everywhere else. People are learning repertoire, they're learning about composers, learning about performers, they're learning about material that I frankly don't have time to talk about. And that's a way of owning the material differently instead of saying, well, that's not my problem, that's somebody else's problem because that class title begins with this thing. I think the spiral model works for me. And then finally, the third one is thinking about a map. And I'm really interested in maps. And if you've been in any of my classes, I think about machines and I think about maps. And Borges has this really great story about a king who was trying to map his kingdom, and he wanted the most perfect map possible. And if you think about a map has a legend, for an inch equals so many miles. And so they weren't satisfied until they got to a one-to-one map, meaning you had to drape the map over the kingdom in order to account for all of it. And it's a ridiculous story. It's meant to be ridiculous because by the time we hear about this story and how he's presenting it, it's all tattered because people have been walking on it, and it's of no use. And there's lots of ways to have a takeaway from that. And one of those is that the only good map is one that can't tell the full story. Maps are only good if they are not telling the truth. They have to tell a half-truth or a part-truth. Otherwise, they can't fit in your pocket. And if I'm thinking about curriculum, I'm thinking about maps, and I'm thinking about how do we develop a system to where instead of trying to recreate the next Jay-Z, by doing exactly whatever Jay-Z did, right? If instead of trying to re-engineer backwards how we got to someone who did something really great that we want to emulate, instead of doing that, which is a one-to-one map, can we find other ways of creating structures that guide people to perhaps a similar destiny, but one that has lots of other routes to get there, especially routes that you may not even, I'm looking at the students now, you may have no idea that you want to be on yet. And so instead of predetermining with a one-to-one map, having different ways of engaging how to get from one place to the next in a more practical way, and one in a way that actually favors, if I may use it, the word dishonesty, in the sense that it's not trying to be anything more than an observation, a tool, not a finality. So those are my thoughts. I thought I'd end. I don't know. I forgot to start the timer. So Jeff, I hope I'm okay with timing. But I was reading through. One of the people that I think about when I think about a great curriculum is, and Dr. Nickel uses this word a lot, this multi-hyphenate, people who can do lots of things. And that may or may not be you, or may how you see it, but one of those multi-hyphenates for me is a man named Charles Rosen, who's a really famous concert pianist, and one of the brilliant thinkers, and he never called himself a musicologist, wasn't trained as one, but he certainly has had that reputation. And I've been thinking about him a lot lately, and in the preface to one of his books, I came across this just today, and I wanted to share it as a way of conclusion. And I think this speaks to what personally I feel as somebody who's interested in ideas, and who's also a musician, who feels that there's no difference between being a musician and being a thinker about music. Above all, to keep in mind, he says, that listening and reading with intensity for pleasure is the one critical activity that can never be dispensed with or superseded. All right, thanks, everybody.
Dr. Dell.
Music ed kind of is a microcosm of the School of Music because so much of what we teach is taught by everybody else. But we look at it from a different point of view. It's in all of the courses that are part of the music ed program, it's not as much the content as the how. And so in many ways, we are entitled to, or suggested that we take things apart, put them together, and then make them better. Right now, we have 153 majors, which counts for 55% of the undergraduate program. And the great thing is that, everybody at this table teaches my students. And in another way of thinking about it, they are all our students. And that's a really powerful idea. If you think about all the classes that you take, so much of what is taught in those classes is the content. It's what is, taking theory and taking you as far as you can, and historically taking it as far as you can. In the music ed side, we do the same thing, but we do it from a pedagogical point of view. And so it's not the historical element, it's how do I teach the historical element? It's how do I teach the theoretical element? And how do I do it in different classroom settings? And so we really have to process through exactly what it takes and what is necessary for our students to go out and be teachers in 4 years or less. So a lot of what we think about in music ed is the how. Students in our curriculum take methods classes that incorporate how to teach an ensemble, whether it's choir, orchestra, band, how to teach elementary general music, and embedded within those, we teach oral skills, we teach theory, we teach arranging, we teach conducting, we teach all of the orchestra instruments. We teach all the instruments actually except for harp and piano within our MUED, but we obviously have an entire piano sequence, so that's part of it as well. And vocally, we have everybody on the vocal side taking multiple classes for both the unchanged voice and for the changed voice, diction, languages. So all of the music ed classes have a connection with every other class that students take. And I think that's a great start to thinking about what we do as being integrated. Looking at the elements of the classes that are outside, our students also have to, in addition to all of their School of Music courses, have to take courses in educational psychology, classroom management, and they also have to take entire courses in how to teach students with special needs. So in addition to being part of the School of Music, they are also part of the College of Ed and actually do get certification through the College of Ed. So in one element, we are, an integrated element of the entire school, and in another way, we're an integrated element of an entirely different school. And so we have lots of stakeholders when it comes to our own curriculum. On top of that, it's important for our students to learn how to teach. And so they are required to be in the schools 70 hours. So that's part of the degree plan as well. So we very often teach our classes in the schools. And the students get up and teach children in the Norman schools on a regular basis. So it's important that they get to teach real kids instead of just their peers. And it really helps them be better prepared to go student teaching. As I said, we have multiple stakeholders. If you are a music ed major, part of the degree plan is that you have to take exams and pass state requirements in order to get your certification. So that's part of the other element when we're looking at our degree plan is, are we teaching everything that is going to be tested? The good thing is that 100% of our students get teaching jobs that are looking for them, and that's very helpful. I think that one of the benefits of being in music ed is just that you get to do everything. You're not, you don't have to just do one element. I get to teach everything during my 2 semesters, and that for me that's very enjoyable. So I don't know. It's just a different integrated idea curricularly. So.
Thank you. Dr. Shames.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's a pleasure to be a listener, actually. I'm sure it's much better for me to be a listener here than an actual participant. But since you asked, I put together a few notes. One time I think W.H. Auden was giving a lecture at the 92nd Street Y, and as you know, or perhaps you don't know, he drank a lot. And as he was getting to the stage, he had this sheaf of papers he was going to read, and he fell, of course. He's drunk. And the papers went all over the floor, and he grabbed them all together, and he went up, and he read them in order, And the general feeling was that it was a brilliant lecture, but a little lagging in organization. So, I've always loved that story, actually. And I also love that Borges story, which I think of constantly. I think there are so many things that are talked about in that. It's just unbelievable. When I think of music making, which I do perpetually, so I think of a lot of things. We're talking about expression, and we're also talking about desire to a certain extent. And we're not talking about things that can be so that in a way, it doesn't fit into this setting that we're in right here, to an academic setting. I mean, I hate to say this. I mean, it's probably horrible, but art doesn't fit, really. And several other things I don't think fit so well, but we find ourselves in this situation. You don't study to understand something in a traditional way or in an academic way when you're learning to play or you're learning to understand music. I don't think that's the way music is written. I don't think it's the way it's performed ever. And I think we have to find ways to, in a funny way, kind of evade the general situation and teach around the corners. And not even to teach, but to provide experiences. I think that my central feeling is that if somebody loves something, they will know it. And so what I look for in students is who has an ineradicable love, who has a love that is going to also be a hunger, and is when I find a student like this, then I know that person will find what they need. They love, they hunger for something, they will find that. Now, how can I create that situation for a person whose hunger has not yet manifested itself? It has to a certain extent. They're here. They've shown up. There's a lot there already. But what can be done? Because my job is, as I understand it, not to teach them something, but to show them how they can teach themselves, to show them how, because I think this is what we all do. We teach ourselves ultimately, and that's the most important thing. And saying something to somebody rarely results in them knowing what it is that you said. There are too many layers that it goes through, and particularly when you're learning how to perform, those layers can involve so many different things. You just have to understand that direct statements don't really get you very far. I feel that it's very important to maximize in a setting like this anything that can broaden your viewpoint. I remember so clearly coming in for a lesson when I was younger. I had quite a great teacher, and I was playing, I think Beethoven Third Concerto. And he took the music off the rack, and he substituted on there a book of Goya's paintings. And the painting that he put up in front of me was the Colossus of Goya. And if you know this painting, it's pretty great. You see, at the bottom there's a village. You sort of sketched out. But you see everybody's running. And you don't really know why they're running, but there's something urgent about this scene, and gradually your eye goes up. And as it goes up, you see what has actually been 90% of the painting, which is this gigantic torso in the sky of the Colossus. And the Colossus is not violent in any way. It's just there. It's just there. And he said, okay, there you are. That's your lesson. I thought it was a pretty great lesson. I think we have to maximize those kinds of opportunities in a school like this. I think actually it's the only way you can go in certain times. How do we make a person, look, Ivan Galamian, great violin teacher, said, all I really do is, he's the guy that taught Perlman, he taught Zuckerman, he taught any number of people. And what's my secret? He says, I make them practice. It seems like such a simple statement, or it can seem like a sarcastic statement, but in fact, I think it's a purely factual statement. Because practicing is saying, here, you're going to experience this. There's no way to say what the music becomes when you practice it. When you practice it, you just begin to understand something. If you sit there long enough, something will reveal itself. You may know something to start with, and gradually you won't know. And then your mind will fill in things. And they won't be intellectual things. All of a sudden, your body will do something. This is what music is about, right? We don't learn with our head so much. A friend of mine had dinner with Stravinsky. He's a good friend of Stravinsky's. And he said, Maestro, does music come from here? He points to his ear. Or, music come from here? And he points to his noggin, his head. Or does it come from here? And he points to his heart. And Stravinsky looks at him and says, it comes from here. And he points to his ear. And it's quite great, right? Your body becomes your teacher. I mean, any musician knows this. All of a sudden, your fingers do something. At the keyboard, or you pick up the bow in a certain way, you blow in a certain way, you sing in a certain way, and all of a sudden something has been alerted inside you, and you know that, and you file it away, and that becomes what you know. But you have to tempt the dog out of the doghouse. I mean, you have to make sure that your students have this experience. You have to make sure that they know that when you don't want to practice, that's when you have to practice. That the discipline for a musician is the discipline for anybody in life. You have to do it when you don't want to. That inspiration doesn't just come, and inspiration, when it does come, is a great pleasure, and of course, for that reason, to be completely distrusted. And you have to show that actually you create your own circumstances. You sit there and you practice, and you must do that every day. So to a certain extent, a school becomes a place where the student has a very warm and safe place to fail continually, and yet at the same time, the behest to be working continually. Both things have to be true. This has to be the place where you can fail. That's one of the most important things, because I don't know any other way to learn performing, or to learn teaching, or to learn anything other than to fail at it at least 100 times. And that's actually one of the great things that a school can do, because there's no problem if you fail here. Actually, it's encouraged. I would say failure is encouraged, because failure means an attempt. Failure means something, and it translates also as, now, if it's a failure, that means there's a desire behind that, because why else would there be a failure, you know? You're disappointed. Well, make sure that the person doesn't feel that that disappointment is overpowering. It's simply, that's simply the name of the game. We all disappoint ourselves, but that's a wonderful thing too. I think that a great plan for a school would be to mix things up a little bit. I would love to see violinists studying with clarinetists. I would love to see singers studying with pianists. I would love to see percussionists studying with anybody. I mean, that was not a slur on accompanist. I just couldn't find the end of that statement. But I always had this, view of, I used to think about this all the time, that there would be in the south of France, that there would be a Chev farm. You see, I've really thought this one out. And they would have a kind of a beautiful chateau on there. And you would invite about 20 artists, you know, young artists to be there, and they would teach a next generation, you know. But what you would have on that second floor is everybody would be in their lessons. They would come out at a bell, maybe, and they would all go into different rooms after that. I think that would be great, because what, you know, we teach, we have to get away from the problems that we encounter. It would be so much greater to hear what somebody else has to offer. I'm almost done. One of the reasons I say this is I remember being at a rehearsal of Seattle Symphony. They had this brilliant timpanist, and he was playing Sibelius' Second Symphony, and God, did he play. It's just the most beautiful thing in the world. I went up to him and said, "What are you doing? How did you learn?" He said, "I watched the violinists." So I thought that was interesting. Now, one thing I think that is very important, and I'm going to bring it to a close right now, and that is my most important thing: play chamber music. This is where you learn what's not written down. This is where you learn what can't be written down. We have to have much more collaboration. Every player must be required every year to be playing chamber music. I think this should be an essential part. I think your training should be taught by 4 people being brought into a room and given Mendelssohn part songs. And they should sing together, and that should be at least one big part of ear training. When you play with other people, you learn something. And you learn how to adjust, and you learn how to hear, and you learn how to hear yourself, because very soon you'll be hearing as the other people hear you. These are ways in which I think we can broaden the opportunities for our students. And I think that they're very important. And I'm just going to close with just this first paragraph, which I just think is one of the greatest meditations on education ever. And it's by Whitman. It's Whitman's poem, "There Was a Child Went Forth." And maybe this is a little too sappy, but it's not. I think it's factually true. I think this is a factually true statement. He says, there was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became. And that object became part of him for the day, or a certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. And he goes on and on and on from there. That openness, that ability to hear beyond, we're dealing with all kinds of things with young performers. We're dealing with them with ourselves. Can we get a person to this point? Can we get ourselves to this point? I think apprenticeship, I think sitting next to somebody doing the same thing, that's where you learn. When somebody is studying with me, I'm studying next to them. I'm grateful to my students because I'm studying with them. I'm not studying for them, I'm studying with them. And that's my great privilege, and that is a very, very great privilege. But I think these are some of my thoughts of what we might bring to education and what I think about all the time. So,
Dr. Ernst, Professor Ernst.
So I did the typical singer thing and didn't write anything down. Okay. Actually, it was interesting because when I was asked to do this, I thought, well, I do this thing where I look up the word. So I decided I'll look up the word holistic and look it up. What is the definition? I won't tell you the definition, and then I thought, oh, I'm going to put that definition into AI and see what it says. And it was really cool. I mean, it gave me 10 points of what it is to have a holistic education, and it has everything that really, what I felt we do here at OU. We collaborate. We try to make a good environment to learn in. I think the collaboration is one of the big things, and I loved hearing what you had to say. That's one of the cool things to be on these. But I started to think the one thing I can talk about is as a singer and as an instrument that's the voice. And what came to my mind right away is that we don't pack our instruments up and put them into the locker. And when we first come to the university, and I think that I teach, and I don't mean this in a bad way, there was so many things that I missed as a student or that were not taught to me as a student. And it made me a great teacher, I think, because there's things that I thought, these are really important things that I didn't know. For whatever, maybe I'm sure I was a terrible listener. And I was told so. But I mean, I got better, of course, but that was like 10 years of work, right? So one of the things I know is that most singers, when they come to the university, have had this great, fantastic choir experience, many of us. And for instance, we have study hour, we go to choir because the choir room's open. Our choir teacher will sign our form, and we get to hang out with our friends for like that whole hour. So we have this like community that we've made, and it saves a lot of our lives. And so I feel like that when students come to the university and they're like, I love to sing, and I want to teach singing, or I want to be a singer, it really comes from this place that we were in high school where we felt really safe. And so then I feel like it's my job to somehow continue that feeling of safety and still educate, which can be difficult. It can be really, and with a singer, our instrument is our voice, it is us. And later on, we start to realize, I don't know, maybe not. We really try to separate that, but when we are critiqued, when we are told something's not right, when we are even allowed to fail, we feel damaged. And so it's a really fine line when our freshmen come in and they're singing to always, this is for me, to always see what they do right, to always see what they do best, and make sure that they are aware of anything that I say is only because I can see what they already do great, you know? So I feel like part of the holistic process should be with us somehow, somewhere, some more education in the psychology of, at least for my area, what happens to the students, and and the carefulness, or not carefulness. Where is that line, you know? And when are we able to start saying that needs to be fixed? You know, this needs to be helped. And there are so many great books and so many great things out there to help students learn processing and dealing with these things. But that was something that was, to me, so I'm from Oklahoma, so I know the system that many of the students are still coming from, where I saw my first opera here at OU, La Boheme, and it was the faculty. It was like they did a faculty performance, and it was amazing. And I thought that was great, but it's still like, well, what am I going to do? I played softball and I sang, and so all I could do, I thought, well, I can't really make money at softball, so I'll sing. Isn't that good? So then when I went to school, I still didn't have in my mind what I was going to do with this voice. I took jazz class. I wanted to be in a jazz group. I auditioned for the musical theater, saw musical theater. Then I actually saw someone who sang coloratura rep in the first show they did. It was Nani Marietta. And I was like, oh, I can do that. But it still did not change the fact that I hated being in Italian diction, and I thought it was a waste of my time, right? And the reason for that was I had a great professor, but they never explained it and put it into process where we sang in the class. It was very cut and dry. So I feel like that's one of the things I really learned was this, how do we get the students participating right away, right, as soon as we can? And I know everyone has a lot to do, but get them doing what it is they loved to do. And so that's one of the main things for me, that explaining of things, because I realized it never was explained to me that you will actually need this, and you can love this, because it's another world. Like, I wasn't from Italy, I wasn't from Germany, France, so there was a whole nother world involved in that. And I think that's one reason I did enjoy music history, because music history brought a lot of those different worlds, very dreamy kind of person. So as a voice teacher, I think it's really important. I know I have the opportunity, the great gift of getting to know each one of my students individually. So I feel like it's really important to me that I give them purpose in their lessons for every course they're taking here at the university, not just my class. But so I think that's kind of ground zero for the students in terms of holistic teaching, the applied, because we get that hour with them, or 2 hours in the studio class, and they come with us with real life situations. And singing is one of the ways that many of them deal with true life situations. And so we want to just continue to bring joy to that, because not everyone's going to go out and have that career, but I do think that the education that they get at OU will affect all the lives that they meet afterwards. And so for me, I just feel like I'm ground zero, that they need to know what it is they're doing in all of those courses. You know, and when I say I didn't listen well, it wasn't until I was actually at an school for opera where I was learning, I was doing chromatic scales, and I could not get this chromatic scale in Lakme, and it was my theory class. So we were using an opera score, and he was teaching me theory with an opera score. And he was like, well, what key are you in? Well, F, you know. And he said, well, where does it end up? On F. I mean, that sounds silly, but that's when everything that I took in oral skills and music theory hit me. It was 10 years from, of schooling, basically. And so I think, so as you're saying, one of the things I would like to see is particularly with singers because they don't come in with most of them are just in choir. They haven't had theory, they haven't had the oral skills other than being in choir. There are some schools, special schools in Texas that they do it. I would love to see a course where that's really related to them. Now, I do know that that is happening here. I've heard that, which I think is amazing. There's some of that's happening in the classroom, but that they really find the importance of those classes for what it is they really want to do, you know? And then I think as we go, the student starts to realize, well, you know, I really love this, but this isn't what I want to do for my life, and then they go find other things to do, right? But I want their experience to be one of, I want them to feel safe so that they can be open and to know that there is no damage done when mistakes are made, and that it's okay to be a soft-bellied creature and to be hurt and to cry over someone telling you, you know, you weren't singing in tune, you know, what? And then also, I think, make us aware. I think there's a lot of, I feel like singers particularly need to do a lot more videoing and a lot more recording and a lot more. So there's a greater connection to actually what's happening with them. A lot of students come in and have, you know, a lot of time is spent on the screen. This is something I really thought was really interesting. The screen is backwards. So they're looking at this night and day, and it's the other direction. So it takes them a while to really reintegrate themselves into the world in the right direction. So this is something too that, you know, I'm working on with, you know, with videoing students and these kind of things. So I think there's just some things that I'm just becoming aware of as a professor. But anyway, so that is my take on the reason I said this is when I read the holistic thing, it was very scientific. And when I think of holistic, I think of, I don't know, it's healing, something healing about the whole. And education, as all of my colleagues have already said so far, to me, it's a healing experience. And we're so lucky to be artists, and we get to hear singing and music making and all day long, you know. And sometimes I think, oh, I'm tired of this, and then I'll hear a violin, and I'm like, oh my gosh, who gets to go to work and hear that, you know? So thank you, everyone.
Do I get to use the special? Yeah. I get to use the special one. Oh, so many beautiful words were said before it got passed down to me. So one thing we all have in common on this stage is, yes, we are all professors, and you know, we have various roles in admin and things like that, but we were actually all students first. And so we've gone through the process of being both and transitioning, and as Dr. Shames was saying, once you become a professional quote-unquote teacher, you're continuing to study. And that could be with your students, it could be through YouTube, it could be through watching TikTok videos. So I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Good thing there's not too many people in this room. I was a really, really, really bad student. Like, horrendous student. All my teachers were like, oh, Christina, why did you do this? I remember I was 16 years old and I just got my driver's license. Woo. It was a very exciting time. I had a Volkswagen Bug that didn't have the gas gauge, didn't work. So I had to like kind of measure, like, okay, I've gone X number of miles, so I should probably fill up the tank. My clarinet lesson, where I would take clarinet lessons was like 45 minutes away from my house. It was like 35, 40 miles. And so I had a tape player in there, because there was tapes at the time, and the tape player didn't work. And so I only had the radio to listen to. And I was very much into music that was not classical at the time. I also played guitar and sang in a rock band. I think my hair was probably pink. And my clarinet teacher, who was very, very regimented with his teaching style, his name was Kalman Block, and he used to be the principal clarinetist of the LA Phil, and then he trained his daughter, who then became the principal clarinetist of the LA Phil. He has since passed, and she has since retired. He said, Christina, you can't play this music if you never listen to it. And I was like, I listen to classical music all the time, and band, and an orchestra, and all these things. He's like, no. It's like, I'm gonna check to make sure that you're listening to classical music. Like, okay, yeah. And so he would give me tapes and things to listen to in the car. He's like, I know you're in the car for 45 minutes. one way. So, anyway, so 2 months later, he goes, Christina, get in your car right now. And I was like, what? Why? What's going on? It's like, I need to know what you've been listening to. I need to see you turn your car on, and I want to hear the music you're listening to. Of course, I got really nervous. I turned it on, and it was like, I don't even remember, blaring rock music or something like that. And he's like, see, I told you. But one thing he said is like, what I'm happy you're doing is you're listening to music that doesn't require perfection. And I was like, okay, I see a little teachable moment here. He's like, you still need to listen to classical music, though. So really what I wanted to talk about is that perfection doesn't make good music or a holistic program, right? We can get all of the A's in the world, we can play every single note perfectly on the page, but is that really what making music's about? No, not really. And actually, one of the most impressive and life-changing experiences I actually had was here at the University of Oklahoma, and it was actually page turning for Dr. Shames. So it was my bad, and I actually missed a page turn, which is like rule number 1, and he was like, it's okay, I could have improvised it. It's like, because he was like, I felt like, because he just ended up turning the page, but after the fact, I was really upset, and I was like, oh my gosh, I had one job, and it was to follow the music and turn the page. And the idea that it's okay if you miss the notes on the page, because that's not what it's about. It's about the experience of being there. It's about, he was accompanying somebody. He's collaborating with somebody. So I've been to school. I have 2 terminal degrees. I've been taking way too many classes in my life. What I would like to see in a program, what makes a holistic program for me is, and I know some of these things aren't realistic in the scheme of things, but no grades, right? I have so many students who just stress all the time about a standardized test. And I can't take standardized tests well. And I would tell them that that's not the point. The point is to try and remember and then translate that information later on into your life, creating your own music or performing in an orchestra. It doesn't matter that you got a 97 versus an 88 or a 65 on the exam, as long as you're learning through the process. The other thing is integration of different genres of music. So while I was telling the story at the beginning about me being a horrible student, horrible clarinet student, all of my clarinet professors have actually said that. And I was like, I very much enjoy studying classical music, but I also knew I would never be solely a clarinetist. And so I used clarinet to become the best musician I could, right? So a lot of times I'll hear students like, oh, we don't teach that at, in these classes, or, they don't offer this, or my teacher wants this, or my teacher wants that. They're only teaching you how to be really good at something, so then you can then teach yourself to be really good at something. And so I really like the integration of different genres, the expectation where perfection is not needed. I know perfection's kind of come up a couple times where people are saying it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to learn from your mistakes, and it's okay to fail. And so, yeah, not having grades. I actually jotted down some other things. I also think a holistic program would also benefit not necessarily having all the students supervised all the time. So you were talking about this safe space where you could kind of learn from each other and heal from each other, but it's a place where your teachers aren't going to tell you that you did something wrong, right? It's a place where you can experiment. And so I think that would be really cool if we had an underground space for our students. In undergrad, for me, it was just the practice rooms, where you're practicing at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you end up not practicing and hanging out and playing songs and improvising and, jumping into somebody's, practice room and changing the lyrics to, an aria to make them silly, things like that, where it's you're allowing for fun and, an ebb and flow of perfection. So yeah, not being supervised to say you are or aren't doing something good. The other thing I learned as a student is I always wanted to be what my professors were, right? I always wanted to be my teacher. I always idolized what they did. And then I would notice when they wouldn't like something, I would somehow not like it. And I always never really noticed why. Why don't I like it? It's, well, because they didn't like it. So I think it's also being aware as professors that we are so integral in the mindset of the student. And I just loved how you were saying you're just finding this place for you to protect them and have a space where they can be themselves, where it's like making sure we don't project our negative energy onto them, because then they suck it up and then they regurgitate it. And instead, opening up a thing where it's like, you don't have to be perfect at everything. You don't have to like everything. Like, we all have different tastes, you know? And it's okay for us to be different. And I actually just wanted to close with, I wanted to ask Jake a question, and if you're aware if that milkshake brought all the boys to the yard.
It did. I am aware. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening.
Dr. Nichol.
It's his own mic.
Yeah.
I've planned it that way. I think my first observation is how brilliant my colleagues are, and insightful and passionate about teaching and instruction and serving students. And in my new role, that's one of the best things in the world to hear. So I guess I'd first just say thank you to you all for the dedication and care you give to our students, because that's what transforms lives of people that study music in our program, which is why we're here. And I have a few points and some things that I'm thinking about as a school leader right now, and it's a filter for every decision that I make or the conversations that I have. Is the question is, what is in the best interest of our students? And I think a lot of times what's in the best interest of a faculty member and a student is aligned, but I think sometimes it's also not aligned, and that's where we have to be careful about always thinking about what's best for that particular individual person, and stratifying that and separating that about what's best for the faculty member. I also think a lot about core values, my values, faculty values, student values. And it's important, what I observe sometimes is that we articulate values or goals to yield behavior. And I think that's the wrong way to go about things. I think we need to assess behavior to define core values and our goals, and always look at what we're doing, how we're spending our time, and what we're asking people to do to determine what we're valuing and what we're looking at in a program. And I think that can be really inspiring. I think it can also be extremely challenging. I've also been thinking a lot about the duality purpose of a university and a school of music, where we have a critical responsibility to preserve things that don't have a place in the marketplace. And I think a lot about myself as a classical saxophonist, that, right, that if you take away a university, what does the job of professional classical saxophonists look like? Well, you might be in a military band, and that's it. There's a saxophone quartet called Noise in Chicago, and they're actually having a career as a chamber group, and they're working really hard at it. That's the outlier. That's unique. But I'm so grateful to the university because it created a space for me to be an expressive artist and to learn and to grow and to have a career as an artist. And you know, think about that, is the act of studying music creates a middle-class lifestyle for anyone that has the resilience to pursue a degree and stay in the vocation. And every day we get to walk into this building and teach art and have a career doing that. And I think that's one of the greatest things in the whole world, and that we get to work with young people who are excited and inspired to study. But the second part of the purpose of the university is that we have a challenge to innovate and to look at where we're going. And I think some of the conflicts that we see, or the friction points, is how does preserving the past confluence with looking towards the future, and how do we create the balance? And we have 120 credit units, 40 of which are a gen ed curriculum. So how do we balance those things within degree programs and courses of study? And I think that's something that we'll continue to work on as we're looking toward the future and as we're looking at the content that we have in our degrees. I've lately been on this kick of multi-hyphenate, as Jake alluded to, and I am a musician because of Duke Ellington. And I grew up listening to Duke Ellington, admiring his music. And he was a composer, arranger, jazz musician, pianist, a personality, a presence. That's the first real multi-hyphenate that I encountered. But if you look at popular music musicians, you know, classical musicians, everywhere you look, you find people that are doing multiple things really well. And I'm not advocating for a gig economy where you must do a lot of things to survive. I'm saying that people are looking inward and are intrinsically motivated to be diverse in their interests and are manifesting that into productive careers and lifestyles. So I do want to make that differentiation. And then I just wrote 2 words at the bottom of my page as I was listening, and I think they're really critical to, as we're thinking about serving students, evaluating our schools. We just must be honest and kind. And I think when we follow those 2 things, and honest isn't always praising, it's not always easy. I think sometimes being honest with a student is one of the hardest things, but also if you approach everything from a point of kindness, I think we can motivate, learn, and grow. And this School of Music right now has hired 14 tenure-track faculty in the past 3 or 4 years. We have a number of searches going on. We're seeing a transformation. So what I'm excited about is to see the impact of the new people combined with the experience of those that have taught here for some time, and what that energy does to spark new ideas, to create collaborations, and to look at our program. And you know, I tell this to students a lot, is you don't look in the mirror in the beginning of the day and say, I want to be mediocre today. You know, and we've got one job, which is to be the best version of ourselves. And I also think some people look in the mirror and they see dirt on their face. Some people try and clean the mirror. Other people will know enough to clean the face. But I think that the combination of people, the combination of working towards an art form, to teaching art, to performing, to creating, to learning, to understanding how pieces are structured and work together, to understanding the context of why composers were working at this time. Every part of a curriculum has a need and a function for creating an understanding of why we work and why we create. And so I think if we're looking at a holistic approach, we've got a lot of competing interests, but we've got a lot of commonality and a lot of shared goals. So I'm excited to see where we're going to go. I also get thinking about the idea of the 21st century, and I think it's a ridiculous thing to talk about. It's a quarter done. Right? You know? And people are using that as a term to talk about looking toward the future. And I'm actually really concerned right now about university mandates to incorporate AI. And I think it's cool in some aspects of music, but one of the greatest things about art is it's a human creation, it's a human-produced thing, and it's a human experience thing. So, you know, I've got to find a way to satiate the university's expectations, but I want to keep music about human connection and human interaction. So, yeah, I have no idea where we're going. I've got goals for us. I've got, you know, collaborations that we'd like to do, but I know, and today reinforces it, that we have a great crew of faculty, we have a great crew of students, and together we're going to realize awesome things. So that's some thoughts I'm thinking about.
Thank you to all of our incredibly thoughtful and passionate panelists. We've got about 10 minutes, and I don't know if there's anybody up there in the booth. Maybe we could turn the lights up in the house. If not, it's okay. Oh, awesome.
It's a saxophonist
Magic.
up there. Yeah, uh-huh.
So,
Oh, I've got one other thought. I think that the solution to all of our problems is tuner metronome, and then we would be okay. Yeah.
You're gonna thumbs up.
Good. Okay.
so does anybody want to respond to anything or chime in? Yes.
I have a question maybe for all of you. Perfection was obviously a thing that was talked about everyone. How do you, like, your students are coming from high school curriculums that are so set, and then coming into a college setting where it's not like that. How do you combat the idea of like perfection being the goal and being the only thing that's going to get you to where you need to be? And how do you flip that on its head and like encourage your students in that, but also combat what also the world is saying from looking at musicians? The idea is that musicians should be perfect, and to be at the top of their game they have to be. So how do you like mold that? And then as a future
Great question. Does anybody want to take that up?
No. I don't really have an answer. No, I think that just always to go into a field of art, to make sure that they realize art is not, it's creating. And so there's no end game, right? And so it's really teaching the love of the art, the love of the community, the love of the support that you're going to find in this community. Because it's true, the higher up you go, the more perfection it's wanted or almost feels required. And so I think over time, that's something that can be incorporated into people. Some people have that naturally. They want it, they enjoy that feeling of like, bam, I knocked that one out of the park, that kind of thing. So again, for me, each individual student and trying to help them deal with that idea of perfectionism. Yeah, and you guys are really, with social media and stuff, you get these kind of not realistic, people aren't really real in there, but they're showing this, oh, my life is perfect, and everything is perfect, But I think about how you are, that's how everybody else is. Everybody's we're all the same. So
There's some ideas that are, the first thing is, you only communicate through your imperfection. Communication is imperfection. It has to be, right? And it can't be anything else. Perfection doesn't communicate anything. Perfection actually, in the sense that you're talking about, I think that you may be talking about, or the sense that maybe we're talking about here, that is something which every musician is going to be faced with. You're going to maybe take an audition, you're going to have to do this, you're going to have to do that. You have to be note perfect, for example. That's not so hard to attain, I would say. The perfection that we're talking about here, that's a skill. You go into a competition, you lock yourself into your studio for a few months, and yeah, you can certainly, before I went to any major competition, 99% of things were done when I was there, That's not so terribly difficult, and it is essential because it may gain you employment. But it's not interesting at all, I mean, it's interesting only to the extent that you use it, and that you also not be frightened by it, because I think it is completely attainable. I think it's a skill. That is simply a skill. And but other than that, I think it's a completely poorly defined kind of idea. I mean, what would that possibly mean, perfection? And the very act of communicating comes out of a desire, and desire is a hunger, is something that's not perfect. It's just, that is completely true. Imperfection is what communicates. However, you got to be very good.
I've got something I'd like to share is, when I was teaching saxophone studio, I stopped valuing the outcome, and I valued the process. And I talked about how the students were growing, what they were achieving, what they were changing, how their playing improved. And when we put the focus totally on value of process, all of a sudden outcomes started happening because their value wasn't determined as a student by whether or not they won or lost a competition or were successful in a performance. Their value was determined by how they grew throughout the process.
And that can often result in something that sounds a lot like perfection, actually, oddly enough.
Yeah, I never thought about perfection as a saxophone teacher. Because it was never there, but that's not to mean that success wasn't there. It's kind of fascinating.
I'll chime in real quick. I think it takes a lot of trust in a classroom to make sure everyone knows that process is right what you're being evaluated on. And yeah, you're right. If everyone's expected, by the time they get to me, they have been taught product over and over. That is what they know, and it takes a lot of encouragement and trust to build a system where, no, I'm talking about process. And you can't fix it in one semester or one space. So it's an existential question. You're right. I do think as a thinker and as a musician, I'm always chasing this idea of craft. And I think craft is what sticks with you for your life. And you don't get better by doing easy things. And so you have to find grist for the mill. You need to find questions that are bottomless, that require you to go back to them again and again and again. You need to find passages on the piano that you cannot play unless you spend months and months and months of it, and then it's like brand new again. So artistry to me is evidence of having returned again and again to a problem, and that's an intellectual reality, and that's also a musical reality. And I don't ever think about the word perfection with that, but I think it's a relationship to craft. And so again, it's about process. So I wish there was a way that everyone would somehow wake up and that was the world we live in. But I think my encouragement is to build a set of trust in your classroom, in your future classroom, to where process really is the kicker, that everyone gets it. And I think that will be transformative, I really do.
Other comments, questions? Yes?
I'm wondering, so it's sort of similar to your question, but this idea that you were talking about of if everyone would wake up to this reality that the process is actually what matters. What's something that you think everyone should or can do, or something that you do every day that can not overnight make you value process, but something that you can do every day that helps you build that mindset and keep yourself like grounded, or help broaden your horizons, that sort of thing?
So I'll say this really quickly because I've said something already. My piano teacher used to always say warming up was just reminding your body how to do the thing again. It was not like so many scales or whatever a day. It was, and I think that's kind of waking up to, like, if I'm a writer, it's hard to do it no matter how many times you've done it. And like playing the C major scale without any kind of imperfections is really hard to do no matter how many times you've played it. And so part of it's like reminding your body how to do the thing. And if you take it as easy as that, it makes the next step a little easier. Like making your bed in the morning, and then like the next thing's you've done something, right? So waking up, having a sense of my relationship to this is that I'm reminding my body what it is to do the thing that I like to do.
I think what I'm hearing behind your question is there are days you wake up and you don't want to, you'd much rather not be doing that, you know. Well, of course. And but you have to start regarding those days as gifts, right? Because you wouldn't figure things out without them, right? I mean, and that's really, really true, you know? That's what I was saying before, you know, these inspired moments that we all have, you know? Distrust those. They don't count for very much at all. For me, for example, if I wake up in the morning, I go to study, or I go to, and everything is great, you know? Oh, I know I'm in trouble. I got to sit there and keep playing until it's not so great. And then I can fix it. Because that means I've started to really hear something, you know? You have to find a way to really hear yourself every day. Now, I think what Dr. Johnson just said is completely right. You got to do it. You've got to get there every day. You have to find some way to do it, and every day will be different. But accept that you're going to have rotten days, and accept you're going to have good days, and pretty soon they kind of even out, and you don't even think about it so much. Oh, it's a rotten day. Have one more cup of coffee, you know, something like that. But that becomes relatively unimportant. But I think you just have to, the thing that gets broken and you fix, that's something that's very strong, that becomes very strong. And the object is, can you hear yourself very clearly? Can you get to that point every day? And that doesn't mean that that's a very special moment. What we're talking about should be totally ordinary. Your work should be totally ordinary. It should be not exceptional at all. Because if you're going to shoot for that every day, you're dead, you know? You just ordinarily work. You do your ordinary work every single day, you know? And in this sense, routine is very important. And you can't evade routine. Routine is something that will actually teach you, you know? Routine teaches you enormously. The first thing it teaches you is forget about yourself. And that's its most important function.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our exceptional panelists. We really appreciate your generosity of time and thought. Thank you.